It was supposed to be a new beginning, a quiet life, a peaceful chapter far away from the chaos I had endured in my younger years. I had bought a house in what the realtor called a serene, secure, and socially vibrant neighborhood, a phrase that later turned into a slow-burning curse. The community was governed by an HOA, the Homeowners Association, something I did not think much of at the time. The place was clean, with trimmed lawns, smiling neighbors, and carefully planned roads lined with identical mailboxes. It looked like the kind of place where people said good morning and waved at each other while watering their hydrangeas. I moved in first, spending a few weeks settling in, painting the walls, replacing light fixtures, fixing creaky floorboards, and getting familiar with the layout. It wasn't until everything was in place that I invited my wife to join me. She had just wrapped up her overseas deployment, and I wanted everything to be perfect for her return. Her name was Maya, and she was everything. This neighborhood was not calm, steady, and tough as nails. We met years ago during a joint training exercise back when I was still in active service. She outranked me back then, and she outranked me now, not just in terms of military ranking but in sheer presence. I had seen her diffuse situations that would have caused most men to break. She didn't wear her strength like a badge, she carried it like armor, silent but powerful. The day she arrived was one I had counted down to for months. I cleaned the house top to bottom, grilled her favorite food, and even lined the driveway with little flags she used to collect from every country she had visited. I picked her up from the airport, and we talked nonstop the whole drive back, laughing and planning our new life in this quiet cul-de-sac. I should have known peace like that would come at a price. We pulled up in front of the house, and just as I opened the trunk to grab her bags, I saw her, the neighborhood sentinel, the woman I had only seen from afar but had already heard whispers about. Karen. She was standing 2 lawns over in front of her hydrangeas, pruning shears in one hand, coffee mug in the other. Her lips were pursed, her eyes narrow, like she was trying to slice through us with her stare. I nodded out of courtesy, but she didn't respond. She just stood there watching us with the kind of glare that made you wonder if you had accidentally run over her cat. Maya noticed her too but didn't say anything. She was trained to read people, analyze behavior, and this woman's hostility was screaming louder than any words could. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just having a bad day, maybe she didn't like newcomers, maybe she had been burned by a past neighbor, but deep down I knew this wasn't the kind of look you give someone you don't know. This was personal. We got inside, and for a few days everything seemed normal. We unpacked together, set up her home office, and started planning a backyard renovation. Maya took early morning runs around the neighborhood, waved at the few residents who didn't avert their eyes, and made an effort to contribute to the community, even joining the neighborhood watch committee meeting as a gesture of goodwill. But Karen, oh Karen, was relentless. It started with small things: notes left on our porch and sign printed in aggressive fonts. One complained about Maya's car being too close to the curb, though it was well within the limits. Another about wind chimes on our porch being a noise nuisance despite them being no louder than a whisper. Then came the passive-aggressive smiles, the disapproving glances, the sudden stops in conversation whenever Maya walked by. One morning while I was at the hardware store picking up lumber for a backyard project, Maya called me. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension in it. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "The cops just showed up at the door." I froze in the paint aisle, gripping the phone tighter. "What did they want?" I asked. "Apparently someone reported a suspicious person moving into the neighborhood," Maya said dryly. "They asked to see identification and to verify that I lived here." "You're kidding." I wish I was," she said. "They were polite, I'll give them that, but the look on their faces when I showed them my military ID, they backed off so fast it was like they had seen a ghost." I was back home in 20 minutes, and Maya stood at the door, calm, composed, but her eyes told another story. She was angry, not the kind of anger that explodes, but the kind that simmers, dangerous and steady. "Karen did this," I said. "You think so?" she replied. "I don't think I know," I said. "There's no one else who would have done it." We walked over to her house together, not to confront but to clarify, to give her a chance to explain, maybe even apologize. I rang her doorbell, and she opened the door a crack, only enough to let her eyes peek out. "Hello," I said. "My name's James. This is my wife Maya. You may have seen us around." "Yes," she said flatly. "I know who you are." "We just wanted to ask if you called the police this morning," I said. "I'm not required to disclose that," she replied in a clipped tone. "No, you're not," Maya said calmly, "but you should know that making false reports is not only dangerous but illegal." Karen's eyes flicked to Maya, then down to her chest where her ID still hung from a chain. Then something strange happened. She froze, her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her face turned pale, the color draining like water down a sink. I recognized that look. It was fear, not the kind you feel when you hear a loud noise, but the kind that rises when you realize you've made a serious mistake. "You served," Karen whispered, more to herself than to us. Maya didn't reply. She didn't have to. Karen shut the door without another word, and that was the moment the tide began to turn. Over the next few days the neighborhood seemed different. Whispers stopped when we passed by, but not out of judgment, out of uncertainty. No one knew what had happened at Karen's house, but they knew something had shifted. Maya's presence had unsettled the carefully curated control Karen had over the HOA and the people who bowed under her rule. Karen began avoiding us, refusing to meet our eyes in public, walking her dog on the other side of the street. Her notes stopped, her smiles vanished. Whatever power she thought she had was beginning to unravel. But we weren't naive, we knew this wasn't over, it never ends with just one incident. People like Karen don't give up, they double down, they find new ways to exert control, and Maya and I weren't about to be blindsided again. That night we sat on the back porch watching the stars, sipping tea. Maya leaned back, her gaze on the sky. "I don't like bullies," she said softly. "Neither do I replied. "Then let's make sure she never thinks she can bully anyone else again," Maya said. And with that our mission changed. We weren't just here to build a life, we were here to protect it. The first battle had been won, but the war with the HOA had only just begun. After Karen slammed that door shut, something shifted in the air of the entire community. The illusion of peace that blanketed our quiet suburban neighborhood began to peel away like old wallpaper, revealing something far uglier beneath. The silence around Karen's house grew heavier. Her once bustling front yard with its overly pruned hedges and obsessive seasonal decor now looked deserted, as if her energy had been redirected into something hidden and calculating. Maya and I continued with our lives, but the tension lingered like the static before a storm. We installed a few extra cameras around the property, not because we felt scared but because we understood what people like Karen could become when their control slipped, and Karen was definitely slipping. A week passed before anything major happened, but the buildup was obvious. Our mail started going missing. Small packages we were expecting simply disappeared. One of Maya's uniforms, which had been at the dry cleaner, mysteriously got delivered to the wrong address. We eventually recovered it from a neighbor who said they found it on their doorstep without a label or note, but Maya didn't believe in coincidences, neither did I. Then came the HOA notices. 3 in a single week. The first claimed our fence was half an inch too high according to the HOA's obscure measurement guidelines. The second accused us of failing to submit an architectural review form for a backyard patio we hadn't even started building yet. The third was the most ridiculous of them all, a citation for displaying non-standard flags. The small military service flag Maya had respectfully placed inside the window of her office apparently violated HOA Code 7.13 non-neutral window displays. I read that one out loud and nearly laughed at how specific and absurd it was. Maya didn't laugh. She sat at the kitchen table reading the notice over and over, the corners of her mouth tight with frustration. "This isn't about the flag," she said quietly. "No, it's about you," I replied. "They're trying to push you out." "Karen doesn't like what she can't control," Maya said, "and she definitely can't control me." We decided it was time to fight back, but we weren't going to do it with shouting or threats. Maya had dealt with insurgents disguised as civilians in war zones. She knew better than anyone how to navigate a hostile environment with patience, precision, and strategy. Step 1 was knowledge. We started attending every single HOA meeting, quietly sitting in the back, watching, listening, documenting. Maya took detailed notes while I recorded audio with a small discreet device on my keychain. What we heard was a masterclass in petty politics and thinly veiled power plays. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was the HOA president, and she wielded that position like a scepter. Every decision passed through her, every complaint was filtered by her opinion, every rule interpreted by her convenience, and the other board members followed her like obedient shadows, afraid to challenge her, afraid to be targeted next. Maya noticed at first the glances, the hesitation in their voices. Whenever Karen spoke, she leaned over to me during one meeting and whispered, "They're scared of her." "I know," I said, "but fear is a weakness. And that's what we would use." Maya reached out to a few neighbors privately, especially those who had also received multiple HOA citations. We invited them for coffee, casual conversation, but always with the same goal: to understand how deep Karen's control went. What we learned was worse than expected. Karen had a history of targeting people who didn't fit her image of the neighborhood. She once fined a family for having too many garden gnomes, then tried to ban outdoor toys after a group of kids drew chalk art on the sidewalk. She harassed a single mother for hanging laundry on a line, claiming it was unsightly. She even tried to have an elderly veteran's flag removed for being too large. The common thread in all of it was that Karen liked obedience and conformity. Maya listened to every story like it was an intelligence briefing. Each detail added to a growing file. We were building not just to protect ourselves but to build a case, a real one that could dismantle her hold over this neighborhood. Then came the security footage. One night around 2, a motion sensor triggered one of our cameras and the alert pinged my phone. I rolled out of bed, checked the feed, and saw a figure in a hoodie sneaking up our driveway. At first I thought it might be a random trespasser until the figure turned and I saw the face. It was Karen. She was holding a clipboard in one hand and a phone in the other, taking pictures of our license plates, of Maya's motorcycle, of the flag inside the window. She even peered into our side gate as if looking for something to report. I woke Maya and showed her the footage. She didn't say a word, just got up, went to her safe, and pulled out her old encrypted military laptop. Within an hour she had clipped the footage, added timestamps, created a formal incident report, and backed everything up on 3 separate drives. We took the report to the local police, not to press charges yet but to document the harassment. The officer at the desk recognized Maya instantly. Her record of service was distinguished enough that people still remembered her from the annual parades and veteran events. His tone shifted from neutral to respectful in seconds. We also handed a copy to the county attorney's office along with the growing list of HOA complaint citations and audio from the meetings. We weren't just building a complaint, we were preparing a legal counteroffensive. But while we were playing defense, we knew Karen would escalate, and she did. The next HOA meeting was packed more than usual. Karen walked in with her usual icy composure, but there was something different about her eyes, something off, like a person who'd just been told they were no longer untouchable. "I call this emergency session to order," she began with her usual self-importance. "It has come to my attention that certain residents are attempting to undermine the integrity of our community." Maya and I exchanged a look. "I would like to propose a vote to revoke certain privileges from new residents who have failed to comply with HOA standards," Karen continued, glancing directly at us. "You mean us?" I asked, loud enough for the room to hear. Karen's lips curled slightly. "I'm not naming names," she said, though everyone knew what she meant. Maya stood slowly, calm, powerful, her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Before any votes are cast, perhaps we should discuss this." And then she pulled out the report, the footage, the citations, the audio recordings of Karen manipulating board decisions, intimidating homeowners, and suggesting retaliatory actions against specific residents. She didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she simply presented facts, and the silence in the room was deafening. One of the board members, a man named Walter, finally spoke. "Karen, is this true?" Karen's face was stone, but her eyes darted. She was losing grip. "I don't have to respond to this smear campaign," she hissed. "Actually you do," Walter said, "and I move to suspend your authority as HOA president until this is reviewed." The room erupted. Karen stormed out, her power broken, her authority shattered. But Maya didn't smile, she stayed focused. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection, about restoring dignity to a neighborhood that had lived under fear. And as we walked out of that meeting, the whispers began again, but this time they weren't about us. They were about Karen. The morning after the emergency HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt like a different place. The air wasn't thick with judgment anymore. Instead, it buzzed with curiosity and something else too quiet, hope. It was as if someone had cracked open a long-sealed window and fresh air was finally rushing in. Karen's absence from the HOA leadership created an instant ripple effect. Notices stopped arriving, complaints vanished, the tight leash around the community was loosening, people waved again, dogs barked freely, kids rode bikes without anxious parents rushing them indoors before Karen's patrols passed by. It was a shift, Maya and I noticed immediately, and it made one thing crystal clear. People weren't just afraid of Karen, they were waiting for someone to stand up to her. But anyone who knew power structures also knew that removing one piece didn't collapse the system, it just exposed the rest. And this system was deeper than we had imagined. Maya began combing through the HOA's records, which we requested through the state's Homeowner Association transparency statute. She used her background in intelligence analysis to track board decisions, citations, fine distributions, and budget allocations. The patterns were disturbing. Thousands of dollars in fines collected over the years with no accounting of where the money went. Contractor deals handed to the same two vendors over and over despite higher bids being submitted from others. One neighbor, a retired accountant named Gloria, confided in us that Karen once pressured her into silence after she asked about misfiled HOA dues. The moment Gloria got involved, her trash pickups mysteriously stopped and she was fined for keeping her bins on the curb too long. It was all retaliation dressed as regulation. Karen might have been dethroned, but her network was still embedded deeply, and if we wanted to bring true change, we had to pull out the entire root system. Maya and I decided to gather real evidence, not just hearsay, not just frustrated neighbors. We needed a documented timeline, proof of systemic abuse, so we started going door to door, respectfully asking residents for their experiences. Some were hesitant at first, but when they realized we weren't just looking for gossip, something shifted. One man told us how he was fined for his daughter's lemonade stand. Another showed us pictures of his car being egged days after he refused to vote in favor of one of Karen's proposals. Another had emails mysteriously deleted from the HOA portal and never received meeting invites after disagreeing with her in public. We logged every story, every name, every date. Maya created a visual board on our garage wall, mapping connections like she used to in field intelligence, threads connecting people, patterns, timelines, and motives. It was like watching a conspiracy unfold in real time. But Karen wasn't finished. We knew she'd try to strike back even without her title, and we didn't have to wait long. One evening while I was grilling in the backyard, I heard the sound of tires skidding sharply on gravel. I turned to see a pickup truck pulling away fast from the end of our driveway. Something had been tossed in front of the gate. I walked over cautiously, Maya joining me, instantly alert. It was a box, no label, taped shut, roughly a foot long. Maya didn't touch it. She pulled out a pair of gloves and carefully inspected the surface, then used a pocket knife to slice it open. Inside was a broken picture frame, a pair of toy dog tags, and a copy of the community guidelines burned around the edges with a single phrase written in red marker across the cover. "You don't belong here." Maya didn't flinch. "I'll take care of this," she said, and immediately drove the box to the local sheriff's department. That was her way, direct, professional, and impossible to intimidate. I stayed home and watched the security footage, found the truck's license plate clear as day, and texted it to her. She didn't even have to ask. The sheriff called us the next morning and confirmed what we already suspected. The truck belonged to a man named Reggie, a local contractor who had worked almost exclusively for the HOA for the last 5 years. One of Karen's trusted people. And now he had crossed a line that put him on record. The sheriff promised to investigate, but Maya didn't wait. She filed for a restraining order against Reggie and used the incident to petition for a formal review of all past HOA contracts awarded under Karen's presidency. We also sent a copy of our compiled report to the County Property Affairs Office and filed a grievance with the State HOA Oversight Committee. What started as personal harassment had become a legal war. Within a week, the committee sent a representative to begin the preliminary review. Their presence sent a message louder than any fine or notice ever could. But we didn't stop there. Maya and I held a community meeting at the local library, away from the HOA clubhouse, away from their cameras, away from Karen. We invited everyone in the neighborhood. Flyers went out through mailboxes. Word spread quickly. The room was packed. I stood at the front, but Maya was the one who spoke. She didn't raise her voice or speak dramatically. She spoke like a soldier to her unit, with clarity and purpose. "We're not here to cause division," she said. "We're here because we deserve better. We deserve leadership that serves, not controls. We deserve transparency, not intimidation." Then she opened the binder and showed the timeline, the audio, the pictures, the receipts. The room stayed silent at first, until Gloria, the retired accountant, stood up and said, "I've waited 10 years for someone to say this out loud." Then another resident stood, then another. Soon we had a room full of people, not just nodding but committing. We created an independent audit committee right there, made up of volunteers with professional backgrounds: law, accounting, ethics, enforcement, real people with nothing to gain but everything to protect. Karen tried to stop it, of course. She emailed the neighborhood accusing us of sowing unrest, of destabilizing the community. But the emails stopped being feared, they became ignored. One by one, neighbors started stepping out of the shadows. One even brought us an old email from Karen threatening to revoke their pool access if they didn't vote her way in the last election. Another neighbor provided voice memos of Karen coaching them on how to word complaints against someone she didn't like. The evidence stack was growing, and so was the resolve of the community. Then came the final piece. A man named David, who used to be on the board but had moved out 3 years ago, emailed us. He had been forced to resign after he challenged Karen on the budget allocations. He still had access to backup HOA emails and had saved them before leaving. What he gave us was the smoking gun. Dozens of messages from Karen coordinating with board members to punish certain homeowners, intentionally delaying approvals, fabricating complaints, sending photos of people's yards with captions like, "Find something wrong with this." Maya compiled it all into one final report and sent it to the State HOA Oversight Committee, the county auditor, the local news, and a homeowners' rights legal nonprofit. And then we waited. But the waiting didn't last long. The news ran a story within days exposing Karen's reign and the systemic abuse of power. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak were now calling into the news station, sharing stories, confirming what we had uncovered. Karen went quiet after that. No emails, no appearances, no statements. She simply vanished behind her door, curtains drawn, cars unmoved. But we knew it wasn't over yet. Because when someone like Karen loses power, they don't accept it. They plot. And that's what worried Maya most. She didn't want revenge, she didn't want attention. She wanted justice and she wanted peace. But peace in a place like this comes with a price. And we were prepared to pay it. Because this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, every neighbor fined into submission, every family that had packed up and left because they couldn't take the pressure. It was about change. Real lasting change. And we weren't leaving until we saw it through. The moment the news broke about Karen's misconduct, the neighborhood entered a strange kind of silence, not the peaceful kind but the uneasy stillness that comes just before a storm, the kind where people keep their heads down, pretend everything is normal, and wait for someone else to make the next move. Karen disappeared from sight entirely. No gardening, no dog walking, no early morning prowls across the lawns. Her house became a fortress. The blinds shut, the porch light off. Her little army of followers went quiet too. Their voices that once echoed at HOA meetings and inside group chats turned into nothing but ghosts. But silence never meant surrender. It meant planning. And while the rest of the neighborhood started feeling the wind shift, Maya and I knew better. We had seen this tactic in war zones: step back, retreat, hold the line until you find the softest place to strike. And strike she did. It began with whispers. One neighbor approached me while I was fixing a loose fence board and said, "Hey man, I don't want to stir anything, but someone's been asking questions about your wife's discharge status." Another one asked me at the mailbox, "Is it true she's not actually a veteran?" The seed was being planted. Karen was trying to do what bullies always did when cornered: destroy credibility. Maya wasn't fazed, she expected it, but that didn't make it any less disgusting. She responded the way she always did, with facts and strength. She contacted the Department of Veterans Affairs and requested certified documents. She had her service records printed and ready for inspection. She even contacted a retired colonel she had served under who lived a few counties over and asked him to speak on her behalf publicly if needed. But Karen wasn't looking for truth. She was looking to stain something that didn't deserve to be stained. Then came the anonymous complaints again, not through the HOA this time but through the local government zoning board. Suddenly we were being accused of unauthorized construction again for the patio we hadn't started. Somehow the zoning board had received photos of bricks and lumber staged behind our house. The thing was, those photos weren't ours, they weren't even our backyard. Maya examined the photos closely. They were taken at night with a wide lens from a distance through a tree line. Our security cameras picked up movement behind the fence around the same time the photo metadata suggested it was taken. Whoever had taken it knew where the camera blind spot was, or at least thought they did. But Maya was ahead of them. She had installed a secondary camera behind the tool shed facing the tree line just in case someone tried to sneak around. And it worked. The image was grainy but clear enough to see Reggie again, crouched with a phone aiming through the trees. This time the sheriff took it seriously. Reggie was picked up and questioned. That was when everything began to unravel. He didn't break right away, but under pressure and facing real consequences he confessed he had been paid to do it, not with money but favors. Karen had promised to secure him a large contract for a new neighborhood development. She told him if he helped her discredit us she could make the HOA board back him on a long-term exclusive maintenance deal. But it wasn't just Reggie. He gave up names. 2 other former board members, a local landscaping company, and even a member of the zoning board who had looked the other way in the past in exchange for kickbacks. The web was wider than we thought. The county launched an internal review of the zoning board. Karen's house was visited by investigators who served her with subpoenas for financial records, HOA minutes, emails, and phone logs. Her empire of control was being pried open piece by piece. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled her efforts. That week we received a letter. Not from her but from a lawyer. It accused Maya of violating community peace by threatening residents attending HOA meetings with intimidation. It claimed Maya had broken HOA rules that required military affiliation displays be pre-approved by the board. The letter even included screenshots from our security footage clipped and edited to make Maya look aggressive. We knew what this was. Desperation. And a last attempt to drag Maya into the dirt. Maya's response was calm, precise, and devastating. She gathered her full service record, every certification, every commendation and statement of honor. She submitted her own formal legal response through a pro bono attorney connected to the Veterans Legal Institute. She also sent a letter directly to Karen's lawyer informing them that if any more slander was published or distributed there would be a formal defamation lawsuit backed by documentation and witness testimony. The letter ended with a phrase that made me raise my eyebrows when I read it. "Your client may have forgotten who she's dealing with, but I have not forgotten who I am." That line hit like a freight train. But Karen's attorney backed off after that. No more letters, no more threats. We thought maybe that would be the end of it, maybe the storm had passed. But then Maya's military ID was stolen. We noticed it missing one morning after she returned from a short jog. She always kept it in a small card holder she wore around her neck when she ran in uniform or on base, but she had taken it off when she came home and set it on the kitchen counter. 10 minutes later it was gone. We searched every inch of the house, nothing. We checked the cameras again, and this time the footage showed something terrifying. A figure had entered the backyard during the jog and used a magnetic card grabber to reach through the dog door and snag the lanyard hanging near the back hallway. It was subtle, it was fast, and it was clearly intentional. We filed another police report, but this time we also contacted military police and federal authorities since the ID was a government-issued credential. Within 48 hours a federal investigator was on the scene. That changed everything. Karen's little game had crossed a line that brought in people with badges that didn't answer to HOA bylaws. They tracked the card to a scanner used at a nearby print shop. The print shop had a customer who had come in trying to replicate a military ID using a grainy image and measurements. Guess who the shop attendant described? Short blonde hair, large sunglasses, agitated voice, demanded it be rushed. Karen. That was the final nail. Federal charges were being prepared against her for identity theft, impersonation, tampering with federal identification, and harassment. And suddenly the woman who had once ruled a cul-de-sac like a dictator was now the subject of a federal investigation. The neighborhood turned again, this time in celebration. People stopped Maya on her walks to thank her, children waved as she passed, neighbors brought over food, offered their support, asked how they could help. The atmosphere had changed permanently. No more fear. No more silence. And Maya never asked for any of it. She didn't want to be the hero. She just wanted justice. And maybe now, maybe finally it was within reach. But there was still one more battle ahead. Because Karen wasn't going to vanish quietly. And the system that let her thrive didn't disappear just because she did. That part was still waiting. By the time federal investigators opened their case on Karen, the neighborhood was no longer just watching from behind closed blinds. They were talking, they were stepping outside again, standing up for themselves and reclaiming the street they had once avoided walking after dark. The change wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. There was a new quiet in the air, a purposeful quiet, the kind that comes after a storm has passed but before the sun comes out, and in that space the truth finally had room to breathe. Maya and I kept going, not because we were angry, not because we needed a win, but because we knew there were still others who needed someone to finish what we had started. The County Ethics Commission announced a formal hearing regarding the HOA board's conduct over the last 5 years. Maya and I were called as lead witnesses. Alongside us stood Gloria, the retired accountant, David, the former board member, and 2 other residents who had previously been too afraid to speak but now showed up without hesitation. The day of the hearing was unusually warm, the kind of day where heat clings to you like a warning. Maya wore her full uniform, her medals perfectly aligned, her shoulders squared, her presence unmistakable. There was no reason to wear it technically, but it sent a message. She wasn't hiding. The room where the hearing was held was plain, a rectangle of chairs, walls lined with county flags, microphones at the front, but the tension inside was anything but plain. Karen sat at one end of the long table, dressed in gray, a sharp contrast to the brightly lit room. Her lawyer sat beside her, already shuffling through papers, his jaw tight with rehearsed indifference. When the commissioner entered, everyone stood. Maya stood the tallest. The hearing opened with formalities, case numbers, review of the complaints. Then they asked Maya to speak first. She didn't read from notes. She didn't pace or raise her voice. She just told the truth. She started from the moment she moved in, the cold stares, the false police report, the photo of her license plate that showed up in a group message between board members. She told them how her military ID had been stolen, how federal authorities had traced it back to Karen. She told them how the HOA had fined her for a flag displayed in her own office, how Karen manipulated the board into silencing people who questioned her. Then she stopped and simply said, "I serve to protect this country's freedom, not to watch it rot in my own backyard." The room stayed silent for a long time. Then the commissioner asked Karen if she had any response. Her lawyer answered instead. "My client was only enforcing community standards," he said clearly. "She acted according to her duties as HOA president and never intended harm." But the documents told a different story. Maya handed over emails Karen had sent instructing Reggie to harass us with zoning complaints, emails from Karen to other board members saying we can't let her think she owns the place, and another that read, "I don't care if she served, she doesn't belong here." The commissioner read them out loud. And with every word the silence grew heavier. When Gloria spoke, she described how Karen used HOA fines as tools of punishment, not regulation. David added that the budget had been manipulated for years, with Karen refusing to show proper audits and funneling contract approvals to friends. Karen's lawyer tried to object multiple times, but the documents made it useless. Every accusation came with timestamps, screenshots, signed testimony. Eventually Karen was asked to speak directly. She stood slowly, her voice quieter than we had ever heard it. "I just wanted the neighborhood to be safe," she said. The commissioner looked up from the file folder. "By targeting a veteran who had done nothing wrong." Karen didn't answer. "By manipulating board members into silence." Still no answer. "By stealing an ID from someone's house." "I didn't steal anything," she snapped, suddenly her voice cracking. "I didn't." "Then why was your image captured outside their home?" "I wasn't alone," she blurted. "Reggie was there, he did it." "So you admit to coordinating it?" Karen sat down, her face white, her jaw clenched. The hearing ended with the commissioner stating the board would be dissolved pending further investigation. The county was taking over temporary oversight of the HOA, and the Attorney General's office would proceed with the criminal case. It was more than a victory, it was vindication. But that wasn't the moment that stuck with me. The moment that stuck with me was when we walked out of the building and 2 older veterans were waiting outside. One of them approached Maya, took off his cap and said, "You fought for all of us today, thank you." She didn't say anything at first, just nodded and shook his hand. The second man said, "We've been waiting for someone like you to walk in and not just talk but do something." That night the neighborhood changed again. Lights came on in windows that had stayed dark for years. Kids played on the sidewalks without getting rushed back inside. Neighbors we barely knew dropped off cookies, left notes on our porch. One even made a wooden flag with Maya's name carved into it. But the biggest change wasn't in the people, it was in Maya. She walked taller. Not because she had won, but because she had done the right thing in a place that had forgotten what that looked like. She started mentoring local teens on weekends, some of them children of neighbors who had watched her fight this battle from their windows. She taught them not just about standing up for themselves but about honor, about discipline, about knowing when to speak and when to act. And Karen's house was eventually listed for sale. Quietly. Without signs. Without ceremony. Just gone. Her name was removed from every HOA document, every board memory, every group message. But her story remained, as a warning, and as proof, that fear loses its power the moment someone decides to stop bowing to it. And that someone was Maya. The sun rose slowly the morning after Karen's house went dark for good. The for sale sign never appeared, but the blinds were open, the driveway was empty, and the curtain that had shielded her from the consequences of her actions had finally fallen. The neighborhood didn't celebrate, but it breathed easier. And so did we. Maya and I stood on the porch, coffee mugs in hand, watching as kids rode bikes past houses that had once looked the other way, watching as neighbors planted flowers they had been too afraid to grow, watching as silence was replaced with conversation again. But peace is not permanent. It is earned and it is guarded. Maya never once called herself a hero. She didn't want awards or recognition. She didn't want her name engraved on a plaque in the HOA clubhouse. She only wanted something that no fine could ever buy: dignity. It was never about one woman, it was about all the people Karen had tried to silence, all the families she had bullied into submission. It was about the principle of freedom on your own land. And even though Karen was gone, the echoes of what she built still lingered in places we could not see. One day a woman from the next neighborhood over showed up on our porch. She was in her 40s, eyes tired, voice shaking slightly. She said her HOA had heard what Maya had done and she wanted to ask a question. How did you do it? Maya invited her inside, listened to her story, took notes just like she did in the early days. The woman explained how their HOA president was using selective enforcement, targeting single parents and immigrants, fining people for things that never existed, keeping the budget hidden. And as she spoke, Maya sat straighter, her hands still, her expression calm but laser-focused. That woman left an hour later with a plan in her hand and a renewed look in her eyes. Word spread. Soon we were getting emails, calls, messages from nearby communities, people who had never spoken up before now asking how to stand up. So we gave them tools. Maya drafted a full guide, a step-by-step breakdown of what we did and why it worked. She called it the Quiet Rebellion. It covered everything from how to document abuse to how to request HOA records legally to how to form alliances and protect each other. We didn't charge anything. It wasn't about profit. It was about purpose. Veterans groups reached out asking Maya to speak at their events, not just about service but about civic strength, about what happens when discipline meets injustice. She never gave fiery speeches, she gave facts. She told them this is not about fighting for control, it's about protecting the people who never had it to begin with. Back in our neighborhood, the temporary county oversight came to an end and a new election was held. This time no one ran unopposed. And this time the vote was public, transparent, and watched by more people than ever before. Gloria the accountant was elected as HOA president by a near-unanimous vote. David returned to the board and 2 new members were chosen, one a high school teacher and the other a local small business owner. No more power games. No more secret rules. The HOA bylaws were rewritten to protect residents from retaliation. A clause was added to guarantee veteran housing rights, and all financials were opened online to every member. The culture had changed. But Maya never joined the board. She never attended another HOA meeting after the new one was formed. Her work was done. One night we sat under the stars on that same back porch where it had all started, where the first note was left and the first suspicion stirred. "Do you regret moving here?" I asked her. She looked at me and said quietly, "I don't regret standing my ground." That night she told me something she had never said out loud. When she returned from overseas, she felt lost, disconnected, unsure if civilian life had a place for her. She didn't feel like a soldier anymore and didn't feel like a citizen either. She felt like someone between worlds. Until Karen pushed her too far. That fight gave her purpose again. Not the kind found in ranks or medals, but the kind you earn when you defend someone too afraid to speak. Karen gave her that without meaning to. And that was the greatest irony of all. One day a letter arrived from the state HOA Oversight Committee thanking Maya for her work and letting her know her guide had been officially adopted as a resident rights reference across the state. She read it quietly, then tucked it in a drawer. She didn't need it framed. Because for Maya the victory was never about paper. It was about peace. True peace. And as we sat on that porch, the wind soft, the trees still, the stars endless above us, I finally realized what this fight had been from the beginning. It was not about moving in. It was about standing up. About reminding people that fear only rules where courage falls silent. And Maya was never silent. She had stood on foreign soil with weapons in hand. And now she stood in her own backyard with the law on her side and truth in her heart. The woman who tried to erase her with fines and false reports, with police calls and threats, had failed. Not because Maya fought back, but because she never backed down. The neighborhood is quiet now. But that quiet is different. It's not fear. It's freedom. And in that silence there's an oath that echoes. Not the kind spoken with hands raised in court or at swearing ceremonies, but the kind made in the heart. To protect the place you call home. no matter who tries to take it. Because once a soldier, always a guardian, and Maya was both. The end. If you think this story was intense, just wait till you see what's coming next on HOA Confidential. Subscribe now and join the fight against HOA corruption across America. And remember, some neighbors cross the line, but we draw it back with truth. This is HOA Confidential, where every story exposes the system they don't want you to see.